guys, what's good, Angel Knots? It's your boy Young Sinai.
Angel Knot.
But first, I'm going to go ahead and get things started with the prayer. Father God, thank you for today, Lord. Thank you for everyone who tunes in. Thank you for everyone who watches the video on the rewatch. I ask that you protect them, bless them and their families, and let them know you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right.
Angel Knot.
All right. So this video is titled "The Last True Handheld Gaming Era: The Vita and 3DS." This video was made 2 months ago by a franchise player. All right, let's check it out. Let's see what he's talking about. I love handhelds. That's my game. I love handhelds. I'm not so much of a console PS5 person, but handhelds, that's my jam. Let's go.
Franchise player, and today we're checking out two amazing handhelds in what I think is actually the end of an era. The 3DS and the Vita, I think, are the last true handheld era. I understand both of these aren't going to be like the last handheld gaming devices we ever see, but it was a generation that was really interesting. You started to have the emergence of smartphones, like iPhones started to pop off, Androids around this time, and people really thought that mobile gaming was going to just kill off handheld gaming. We're going to dive into this generation, going to do a deep dive on the 3DS and the Vita, games for each of these systems, what made these systems unique, similarities that both these systems actually shared with smartphones from around that time, and vice versa. There was definitely a bit of crossover with apps and things like that and other features, but ultimately we'll just take a look back at how awesome both the 3DS and Vita both are, and still are to this day. So yeah, welcome to the wild world of Generation 8 handhelds. Now, the Nintendo 3DS originally launched, at least here in North America, on March 27th.
So I want to say this. I have a 3DS, a new 3DS XL. I've never owned a Vita, nor have I ever played a Vita. They look super dope, but a lot of the games I've seen that go with it, I don't know if I'm really interested in. Give me some Vita game recommendations, and I'll go ahead and put them on my AYN Odin too. But I also want to put out that I feel like right now we are like in the renaissance of handheld gaming. I don't think that it's ended at all. I mean, if we looking at, first part, I mean, yeah, first parties, I guess we can call it. The major players like Nintendo and all them, maybe. But I mean, come on now. We got the Switch, which if you want to say, okay, well, that's not a handheld, that is a hybrid technically. Well, what about the Switch Lite, right? And then don't even get me started on retro handhelds. Like Ambernick is putting out a device every 3 days. Retroid, the Steam Deck, the AYN Odin, the ROG Ally. Like, we are in a renaissance. So I definitely don't agree with the title, "The Last True Handheld Era," but I'm gonna let them cook.
Of 2011, and I feel like I kind of always say this with all the older consoles I look at, but it's really hard to believe that it was that long ago.
My bad. I'm sorry. I wonder if he knows about. I need to let him cook, but I wonder if he knows about all of these retro handhelds, because not everybody knows about retro handhelds. Like, if you are out in public and you are playing like a AYN Odin or something like that, like, oh, is that a Nintendo Switch? Like, people don't know what it is. Or if they see you playing a Steam Deck, like a regular person, not like a crazy person like us who's like looking up this stuff on the internet and watching videos at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning about this stuff, but like a regular schmegular person, when you pull out a Nintendo, I'm sorry, a Steam Deck, they're like, what is that? Like, it's been so many people have said that to me.
What was kind of interesting about the 3DS launch, and I don't remember this because I didn't have a 3DS until way later on, but these originally launched and retailed at $249, which seems kind of steep for 2011. And apparently there were some pretty bad sales numbers off the bat during that. So Nintendo was like, hey, 6 months later, let's drop the price to $169. And that really helped pick things up for them in the sales department. It's almost hard to remember a world before literally everybody having a smartphone, but during this era, late 2010, early 2011, I'd even say early 2012, smartphones were becoming more and more mainstream, more and more popular. iPhones were really hitting their stride. Androids were really starting to get out there and do some good things, especially Samsung. And I think Nintendo and Sony both were getting a little nervous.
Hey, there was some good games on the Apple Store when like the first, second, third. I don't know about the first, but at least like the iPod Touch era. Those games were classic. Y'all remember those? I remember Donut Games. Man, they had so many good games. They had the little guys jumping off the Titanic onto the lifesavers. And then you had the one game where you flick the uh trash into the waste paper basket. Those are some fun games.
About what this could potentially do to the mobile gaming market. So I think that really pushed Nintendo and Sony, we'll get into that a bit later, but to go extra hard on development for these games and really make some special titles. The Nintendo 3DS library of games is insanely hard to beat. I mean, I'm a Vita lover, man, but hey, Nintendo did not play around this generation and dropped banger after banger. The Vita has a ton of good games too, and I'll go over that as well, but the 3DS titles were just insane this generation. But before we talk about the amazing library of 3DS games, I think Nintendo did an incredible job at making the 3DS really accessible to people from all walks of life, all ages, all backgrounds, and had pretty much a model for anyone. You had the original launch 3DS. That one's a bit smaller. I actually have never even played on an original 3DS. You have the new 3DS and the new 3DS XL. The new 3DS XL is the model I have. I personally love it.
Yeah, me too. I play that to this day. Man, I tell you what, it's one of my favorite games on there, and I'll never hear anybody talking about it. Is uh is it Shotgun Clock? Hold on. I gotta look the name up. My bad, y'all.
The new models have a more powerful processor, which is beneficial, and also has a C stick, which could be nice to have on some games too. Nintendo also did a great job at having what I like to call budget models of the 3DS family, and you had the original 2DS, which a lot of people kind of joke around and they're like, hey, this thing looks like a door stopper.
Gunman Clive. That's what it's called. Gunman Clive. That game is dope. It's like the art style is like drawn. It's super tight. Let me know if you ever played that.
It's actually a pretty comfortable system. They're fairly affordable. So if you're wanting to jump into 3DS or to check out the 3DS library, the 2DS is a great way to do it. And then there's also the new 2DS XL, which still has the clamshell design with the dual screens, but there's no 3DS feature on either 2DS model, which for me is not a big deal. But if you are interested in playing some games in 3D, you might want to stay away from the 2DSs. Even though a lot of people had fear in this generation, they were like, oh my god, smartphones are going to have incredible games and they're going to kill off handhelds. I mean, the 3DS did not play around. They had basically these new and improved Nintendo 64 titles, which would blow any mobile game out of the water back then. I mean, even today, in my opinion, you had legendary games like Majora's Mask, Ocarina of Time, Star Fox 64, just to name a few, which really showed that this handheld was a true powerhouse. Other than those new and improved Nintendo 64 titles that were now playable on a handheld, which was awesome for the time and still is today, you had a ton of original 3DS titles that were great in their own right. You had, in my opinion, I'm a little biased, dude, but Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. I love Gen 3, so it was really cool to see remakes of those on the 3DS, and they're some of my favorite Pokemon games of all time. With it being a new generation for Nintendo, of course you had a new Mario Kart, so you had Mario Kart 7. I know it doesn't get as much love as Mario Kart 8, but I think 7 is still a fun game. You had Kid Icarus Uprising, Smash Bros 3DS. Being able to play Smash on the go is insane, and definitely was for the time. Wasn't as good as the console counterpart, RIP to the Wii U, but Smash Bros on 3DS is definitely a fun one. Xenoblade Chronicles 3D, Kirby Triple Deluxe is one of my favorites too, and that's a pretty cheap game. And you even have a game like
And going on with what I was saying earlier regarding this being like the renaissance of handhelds, the fact that now that the eShop is no longer available and you can get the H shop and down download all of these games that he's talking about. Like, this is the perfect time to be a handheld gamer.
Metroid Samus Returns, so there was no shortage of great games to play on the 3DS. And if those 3DS games were not enough for you, if those were not enough to fill your void for entertainment needs, you had Virtual Console, which I really wish Nintendo would bring back on the Switch, but instead they'd rather charge you a subscription with Nintendo Switch Online. But it's another rant for another day, man.
Right.
You were able to play SNES games, like Final Fight, Super Mario Kart, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Mega Man X, so great SNES games. You were able to play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. You had Wario Land 3, Zelda Oracle of Seasons, the Donkey Kong Land games, the Gen 1 and Gen 2 Pokemon games. So, Pokemon Crystal, Pokemon Yellow, Pokemon Red, which is really cool. And you don't have to worry about buying a physical copy, which was expensive then and is even more expensive now. And then you even had a handful of GBA games. So Virtual Console plus the actual 3DS library was, man, at the time, hate to say it, was smoking the Vita. Now, before we go in on the Vita, which I love, the Vita is one of my favorite handhelds of all time.
Oh, that Vita, it looks so good. That design looks so elegant. Like, it definitely withstood the test of time.
Wanted to talk about some of the similarities that these handhelds had with actual smartphones at the time. So what was kind of interesting about the 3DS and the Vita is both of these systems actually had cameras, and they really had kind of like gimmicky ways to try to put these into games and things like that. But I think it was more of a reason just to kind of be like, hey, phones have nice cameras. We're going to throw a camera on here. It might not be that great, but hey, it might help us compete more. Another thing that's interesting too was both of these systems actually had touchscreens. I understand the original DS had a touchscreen, but this was kind of a big deal for Sony because it was the first PlayStation system that was going to have a touchscreen. Remember, the PSP did not have one, but the original DS did.
I did have a PSP. I never had a Vita, but I had a PSP.
So both of these systems, I think, were really trying to do anything they could to seem as modern and as cutting edge as some of the leading smartphone developers at the time, like Apple and Samsung. Now we're finally getting...
That's so funny, man. Oh, that's so cute. That's so adorable. They're just showing off the barcode scanning, the beginning technology. That's hilarious.
Smartphone developers at the time,
Look at
like
that.
Apple and Samsung. Now we're finally getting into the PS Vita segment of this generation, and I loved the Vita. I had one a little after launch. It was actually one that my dad and I shared, but it was kind of funny is this released February 15th of 2012, and they were just like, hey, you know what? Nintendo launched the 3DS at $250. We're going to do the same thing and drop this and have it retail at $249.99, which I think for the Vita, $249 made a little bit more sense. I still think for the time it was a little pricey considering you could spend a little bit more and get a PS3, you'd get a full-fledged home console, but ultimately I think that $249 made a little more sense for the Vita. What was pretty crazy about the PS Vita was there was two different models you could get even at launch. There was just the traditional Vita 1000 that had Wi-Fi, obviously that's how you'd connect to PSN and play online and download stuff, but there was also a model you could get that was the Vita 1000 with 3G capabilities. Now looking back, I think it was kind of odd that it was exclusively through AT&T, but was really just a product of its time. I think the
Yeah, because that's how Apple was with the iPhone when it first came out. It was an AT&T exclusive.
PS Vita and PlayStation was just like, hey, all these smartphones are in everyone's pocket with internet access to app stores and things like that. We want people to bring a PlayStation product around with internet capabilities anywhere to where they can download updates, they can download DLC, try demos out, stream. I mean, there was even apps for the Vita, which was pretty cool. You had apps like Netflix. I actually remember using Netflix a decent amount on Vita just because the screen was way better than any phone or pretty much any other device I had at the time. So that OLED screen was pretty nice to watch movies or shows on. You had YouTube. Didn't use YouTube a ton on Vita back in the day, but you had Twitter and email. So pretty funny looking back that you were able to check your email on a PS Vita. The Vita had a ton of features that were very similar to smartphones of the era. The camera, the apps, the 3G. I mean, having actual cellular service on a Vita is pretty awesome. I mean, looking back, there's no way in hell my mom would have been down to pay for internet on a Vita. like on top of me having a phone, there would have been not a chance. So if you actually had 3G on your Vita back in the day, let me know. I'm curious how it was for maybe playing online or downloads on the go. I imagine it wasn't crazy fast because it's 3G, but kind of sick regardless. One area that the Vita gets a lot of hate, and I get it from a surface level perspective, it doesn't look like the Vita has a lot of games,
Yeah,
which
that's what I said. Not necessarily that it doesn't have a lot of games, but it doesn't have a lot of games that appeal to me from the games that I've seen. But please tell me I'm wrong and let me know what games I should get.
on one end of the spectrum to like a more, I would say, like casual gamer, that's totally true, right? I mean, there's not a ton of AAA games, but there is a ton of good games. You have, I mean, just to name a few here, Gravity Rush, which ended up getting ported to PS4, but definitely fun to play on Vita. Killzone Mercenary, which in my opinion is probably the best looking game on Vita. It's pretty much like having a true PS3 era FPS on the go. Uncharted Golden Abyss, if you like the Uncharted series, that's, I think, a game that's mandatory that you got to have. Tearaway is another good one. Wipeout 2048, one of my favorite racing games. Actually, it might be my favorite racing game on Vita. It's super fun and the graphics are awesome. Another legendary game is Persona 4 Golden. I know for a long time, I mean, the Vita was pretty much, it was kind of a joke where it was like, hey, the Vita is like the Persona 4 machine. And luckily, Persona 4 is on other systems now, and I think it's on Steam, so there's tons of other ways to play it, but it's still really fun on Vita and looks great. Freedom Wars is another underrated game that is actually getting a remaster, I believe, or a remake. I think it's actually just a remaster, but that'll be coming out. So if you haven't played Freedom Wars, if you don't have a Vita, highly recommend checking that out. And then, of course, what was also legendary about the Vita is you had the HD collections of those PS2 era games. So you had things like Ratchet and Clank, Jack and Daxter, Metal Gear Solid. So there's some
Hey,
great games that you can play from the PS2 era in HD on a Vita. But yeah, I mean, other than kind of the main staples on the Vita, you do have to dig a little deeper and kind of do your homework on if you want to continue playing on your Vita. I know that kind of sounds like a chore, but it's a fun system to go and just kind of research obscure games and try to find and play stuff that you wouldn't normally play on a system if it wasn't the Vita. And that's what I really like about the Vita. It may not have, millions upon millions of options of games, right? But the ones you do find are awesome and pretty underrated and not very popular, which is kind of cool to play something a little different here and there. I know the Vita has shown me a bunch of new titles and games that I definitely would not have played if they weren't on the Vita. And if you're interested in checking out some more obscure games or underrated Vita games, I have a couple videos here on the channel of like PS Vita shmups, underrated games, some great arcade games on Vita. So if you're interested in that, scroll through the channel, you'll be able to find them. But in regards to models on the Vita, there was, unfortunately only that 1000 and then the 1000 with the 3G and the Vita 2000. So not nearly as many models as the 3DS, but definitely some pros and cons to the 1000 versus the 2000. I have a video on that on the channel as well, kind of going a little more in depth on the differences between the two. Personally, just to save you some time if you don't want to peep that video, I prefer the 1000 for the OLED screen, and it has a little bit more of a premium feel in my opinion. But yeah, that'll pretty much do it for today's video. I love the Vita, I love the 3DS. Out of the two, I probably like the Vita a bit more, even though there's some amazing games on the 3DS. But the whole reason I really wanted to make this video was basically just breaking down how special of an era this was for handheld gamers and just gamers in general. I know we have tons of other handhelds out there nowadays, but I don't think we'll ever see a generation like this again, or at least not for a really long time, where you have games specifically designed and built from the ground up for portable play. So let me know what some of your favorite memories are with the Vita and the 3DS. I'll do a video later on of the PSP and DS and kind of a look back at that generation as well. But I think this generation is, far enough back now where we can kind of look back and see, what went right, what went wrong. And yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty nostalgic for this generation, not as much as other generations, but overall a great one nonetheless. And yeah, let me know some memories you have with the Vita or the 3DS, some of your favorite games.
all right, yo. So, um, kind of like, I mean, he touched on, that there are other handhelds, but I feel like I said, we are in the renaissance of handheld gaming. I don't care what you say, there is a handheld for you. There are too many different options. Um, but yeah, I appreciate you guys sticking around and tuning in. Okay. Hey, if you stuck around this long, I appreciate you. Please subscribe. I am on my journey to my first 1,000 subscribers. And if you're watching me on Twitch, you can find me on YouTube at Angel Not Geek Stuff. Yeah, but I appreciate you guys hanging out with me, and hopefully y'all had some fun. All right, God bless to you and your family. Salutations to the nations. Peace.
Angel not.